Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1105 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. Now that you have, let's begin. Not gonna lie, it feels pretty dang good to finally have the pieces move around the Egghead board. So while previous chapters felt a lot like Oda was pulling from Sabaody with this arc, this chapter we kind of flipped the page a little bit and it feels a lot like Ohara, and it feels a lot like the end of Enies Lobby. Not coincidentally, those are the two events that are associated with Buster Calls, which, you know, it's time. That was a big part of this chapter, is the Marines have decided we're just gonna blow it all up. I found it incredibly ironic that the chapter was titled The Height of Folly. And of course, the chapter title was referenced to the end of the chapter with Saturn talking about Kuma. His struggle was the height of folly. He sacrificed everything in order to protect Jory Bonnie, and in the process allowed the government to create clones of himself, super weapons. And these super weapons are going to be responsible for his daughter's death. The icing on the cake of Kuma's hypothetical mistakes. But as I read the chapter with the title in mind, I couldn't help but think Saturn's actions here are the actual height of folly. And honestly, I think that this is true in a number of different ways. You know, initially, Saturn and the government didn't want to destroy Egghead. They didn't want to destroy all of this progress. Technology that may not be discovered again for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. Technology that they would probably benefit most from. But it seems like Saturn had a change of heart and is laying waste to all of it. Why is he doing this? His stated reason is honestly BS to me. You think that there might be something here that you need to destroy? Maybe somebody here Vegapunk has given secrets of the Void Century to? That's why you have to destroy it? Saturn has the life experience and the tools to know Vegapunk incredibly well. Know Vegapunk well enough to know what it is that he will do and what it is that he won't do. And we know that Vegapunk didn't involve random people. My impression of the chapter is that the real reason for all of this is that Saturn is mad. He got punched by a slave, betrayed by Vegapunk, and he is butthurt about it. Remember, Saturn already had a conversation with Vegapunk where he made it explicitly clear that he intends on punishing him. He says, "Tell me which of you is the first to die. Tell me the cruelest order possible. I want you to die cursing yourself for daring to cross the world government." He tried and failed to kill Bonnie. So maybe he decided that the cruelest order possible begins with destroying all of Vegapunk's life work, to ensure that in Vegapunk's final moments he feels like he has done nothing. The reason I like this interpretation so much is that it kind of stands out a little bit, that you see everybody, literally everybody, leave Saturn and Kizaru to try and escape except for Dr. Vegapunk. Kizaru's initial task, the whole point of coming to Egghead, was to kill Vegapunk. Vegapunk is here and nobody is protecting him, so why don't they just kill him? The reason is cruelty. Saturn is intentionally choosing to sacrifice everything that the government could come to possess in Egghead for the sake of making Vegapunk hurt. And this, in my opinion, is the real height of folly. The common saying here is cutting off one's nose to spite one's face. But to give Saturn the tiniest amount of credit, I do think that fear is related to his abilities in some way. Like we saw before that he froze the Straw Hats around him, and then suddenly Kuma arrives, punches him, and then the spell is kind of broken. It's possible that Saturn needs to be cruel in order to regain the best of his abilities. The Buster Call then is a weapon, it's an instrument of fear. It's supposed to help him regain control of the situation. And there is no doubt that it is incredibly cool that he tells all of the Marines to leave and go initiate the Buster Call, but he and Kizaru are staying behind. To me, it's like Saturn wanted to remind everybody that he is unkillable. And there's probably not a flashier, more impactful way of doing so than this. This being said, I still think that he's losing far more than he's gaining. I feel like part of what Oda wanted to convey with this scene is some kind of parallel with the Ancient Kingdom. As they initiate the first volley, Oda made a point for them to call Egghead the Future Island, or the Future City, which as we know now is more accurately called the Past City. It's a reminder that Egghead is a reflection of what once was. Egghead is basically the Ancient Kingdom, and just like in the past, the Ancient Kingdom and its technological advancements are being destroyed. But it's just so funny to me that Saturn says we have no need for any more advancements. Destroying Egghead isn't a big deal. Okay, but hasn't the world government, the Gorosei and Imu, desired the technology of the Ancient Kingdom for 800 years? Haven't they been looking for the ancient weapons? Did they not allow Vegapunk to recreate lost technology so that they could utilize it? I just can't get over how stupid and short-sighted it is to raise Egghead to the ground. Your enemies are actively trying to leave the island, meaning the treasure or the spoil is there for you to take. I wonder if this scene or this arc in any way parallels what actually happened during the Void Century to the Ancient Kingdom. Did the world government, in a similar way, destroy the technology because they felt like that is what they needed to do. And imagine the advantage they would have possessed over these last 800 years with that. But the irony of Saturn calling Kuma's decisions the height of folly extends even further than this, because, you know, does anybody in the world believe that the Pacifista are actually going to kill Bonnie? I just can't see it, man. I just can't. The Pacifista are clones of Kuma. I take this to mean that they have the same DNA, or the same lineage factor. We saw an explicit example of this recently with the Seraphim, but when they cloned the Chichibukai with the Seraphim, memories transferred with it. S-Snake seemed to have some affinity with Luffy that is totally inexplicable without the transference of life experience and memory. When Kuma arrived to save Bonnie, Vegapunk described it as the power of love. S-Snake, a clone of Boa Hancock who loved Luffy, seems to remember this love. Long story short is I think that lineage factor is another word for soul. A person's lineage factor is the essence of who they are, both genetically, biologically, and also their life experience. So all of the Pacifista are clones of Kuma, essentially the same as the Seraphim. Just the same, they should remember their love for Bonnie. Now obviously the future of One Piece is for Oda to decide. Maybe we're wrong about this, but this just seems incredibly obvious since the very beginning of this arc. Bonnie would have some moment with the Pacifista. This felt inevitable when we see Bonnie interact with the Pacifista for the first time earlier in Egghead, and she wouldn't let anybody harm them. It would be utterly surprising if Oda didn't have a purpose for the literal very first chapter of Egghead, where we see with the weaponized sea beasts, Lilith comments on their failure. They weren't supposed to just attack any ship that passes by. She ponders to herself, perhaps overriding primal desires is simply impossible. So yeah, I don't want to repeat myself, but in my opinion, the Pacifista are exactly the same as the Seraphim. The only difference is, like Kuma, they had their consciousness removed. But as Lilith tells us, and we see actively in the story, primal desires can't be overridden. Their love for Bonnie will get them to disobey orders, in my opinion. So Saturn's take was bad in the here and now, but I think in the next chapter it's going to be proven to be even more absolutely and totally wrong, which is great. I'm here for it. It is quite honestly hilarious to me that Saturn is supposedly one of the smartest people in the world, you know, a scientist to possibly in some way rival Vegapunk. He is so full of himself. Get freaking humbled, dude. As an aside, I noticed some things in the real world that are similar to this. Like, technology now in the real world is progressing at a crazy rate. So in a lot of different fields, we rely on experts to actually know what the hell they're talking about. And it would blow your mind in some fields like the medical field, how the medical industry okays some things for public use. In many cases, they don't just okay it, but they actively advertise that people go and use whatever it might be. For sports fans out there, do you guys remember when microfracture surgery was a thing? It's not anymore. This was only like 15 years ago. The best and most advanced and expensive medicine of the time was totally fraudulent. Or like in the distant past, you can think of things like lobotomies. The point I'm making is that some of the most educated and intelligent experts sometimes talk out of their ass like Saturn. They are 100% confident in things that they think that they know, but we're still learning. And I see a lot of similarity with Vegapunk's research. But I'm just gonna go ahead and say this up front. Even if, in the next chapter, say, the Pacifista attack Bonnie, I'm expecting them to turn eventually. However long it takes for their Kuma souls to emerge, it's gotta happen. I will be dying on that hill. And I suppose that this plays a pretty big role in keeping up my optimism for this arc. It's pretty wild, right? There's a literal buster call going off on the island. I actually want to see that. It's crazy how whenever a buster call occurred before, we were never actually like on the island. They were leaving or had just left to like literally be in the middle of it. I'm imagining some freaking cool panels. But Kizaru is an absolute boss. We still don't have a definitive way of defeating Saturn. There's a literal buster call. I think tension should be a little bit higher than I actually feel. Like, I would honestly describe my feeling as like giddy. I'm excited to own the world government. Make them look bad. That's my mindset right now, right or wrong. So I feel like either Oda has foreshadowed a little bit too heavily about how the strats are going to get out of these various predicaments. Talk about Kizaru, man. Kizaru is still incredibly awesome in the chapter, but I still don't totally buy him as a villain, right? Even if he doesn't help the strats, I still think that he might weaponized incompetence kind of fail, but on purpose. So it makes him less threatening. Like in this chapter, I truly feel as if Kizaru could have killed them if he really wanted to. He just doesn't really want that. So either Oda has foreshadowed a little bit too heavily how the strats are going to get out of this, or when this flips on its head and it like goes extremely badly, man, I'm going to be shook. Because my confidence is pretty high. For instance, we we can talk about the strats. This is feeling a lot like the end of Enies Lobby, and part of what creates that feeling is Sanji's finally flipped the switch, man. We're getting Mr. Prince. Sometimes I feel like these moments for Sanji are too far and few. It's to the point that you can almost forget when it happens, like at the end of Enies Lobby, man. Sanji was a boss, and he was the entire reason the crew managed to escape, being able to open the gates of justice. You can make arguments about everyone and everything. Maybe the going merry was essential to get the crew out of there. Okay, I can buy that. But there might have been another way. Opening the gates of justice was something only Sanji could do. They were 100% for sure dead without him. And competent Sanji, man, it's just my favorite aspect of Sanji. So once again, guys, you need to just keep in check when you have expectations. I have expectations. When you have expectations, you could potentially get disappointed, surprised, or subverted. Oda just might decide to go whoop-bam, and then everything that you thought you know turns against you. This feels like the end of Enies Lobby. This feels like Mr. Prince. Therefore, I think that Sanji is gonna go full stealth black, be able to become invisible, and find some way of rescuing Dr. Vegapunk. He says he's gonna do it, I believe him. With Zoro, man. Zoro fans right now. Feeling pretty bad, huh? Still fighting Lucci, but I don't think he's gonna lose, especially now that Jinbei is supposedly going to help. That should be over pretty soon, although it's a huge surprise that battle is not already over. Zoro's as strong as Luffy crowd getting real silent right about now. And I know that there's gonna be people in the comments that are gonna be like, JB, you really underestimated Lucci. He is an awakened Dofer. He's a legit fighter now. It's like, no, I haven't underestimated Lucci. I just don't think that he's that strong. Sorry. Jokes aside, I really didn't think that a simple awakening would make that much of a difference. I just felt like Zoro was at a point in time where Haki was the most crucial thing to top tier battles, and Zoro can cut pretty much anything. We'd be talking about him on the tier below Yonko. Honestly, part of the dynamics of this battle between Lucci and Zoro doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, just in the sense that, like, look, if Lucci is fast enough to avoid Zoro's attacks, then Lucci should just beat Zoro. And if Lucci is not fast enough to avoid Zoro's attacks, and Zoro should just cut Lucci, and it should be like, that should be the battle. I feel like Oda kind of cheated by off-screening this, and I'm curious if we will see any of it. I guess that we will, but it's kind of weird that we haven't. But anyway, all the other strats are seemingly accounted for. They're preparing to leave, and the real question that we're left with in this chapter is the whole plan revolved around Vegaforce 01 being able to fly them past the entrapment. But Vegaforce 01 has had a bad day. But again, not a whole lot of actual tension from me, because I feel like Oda's already introduced how the strats are going to do that, right? Vegaforce 01 looks a lot like the ancient giant robot, which we have already seen is starting to wake up. So I just have it in my mind that with Brook and with Lilith, they froze the clouds to be able to move the Thousand Sunny. But Brook didn't think too far in advance because he froze the clouds, but they didn't actually have a way to stop. So supposedly the ship is going to fall off the edge. And I just think that the ancient iron giant is going to catch them. And then suddenly the way out will emerge. And I suppose that something could happen with the Seraphim, but I see the Seraphim in a very similar way as I see the Pacifista. So yeah, if we're being honest, as far as the world government is concerned, things that they might accomplish against the strats, I just don't see it. But if there's a reason to feel tension at all, it might have to do with another faction. We see again in this chapter that Robin is strangely injured and has been resting. Oda's decision to do that with Robin in this arc is alarming, because it's been foreshadowed for hundreds of chapters now that various factions around the world will be gunning for Robin. We were told to prepare for it. I think that Oda could have possibly masked this better by having more strats be injured and down for the count. But with it just being Robin, right, it stands out like a sore thumb. Something's gotta happen with her. There's gotta be a reason. Either that or it has to be a very intentional red herring, something Oda is throwing out there to make sure that we're thinking about it. But we already know that the Blackbeard pirates are here in some form, and Blackbeard absolutely could have a use for Robin. And this is a pretty good segue to the end of the chapter, where we see a faction is arriving to Egghead. In my opinion, the most obvious answer to this is the rest of the Blackbeard pirates. It could totally be true that initially there was only some members of the Blackbeard pirates, like for instance Lafitte and Katarina Devon, that were able to stay low-key. But Egghead has lasted a surprisingly long time, over a day for sure, and that gives them time to evaluate what's here, decide if there's anything that they may want, and contact the rest of the Blackbeard pirates such as Blackbeard, so that it is only until now that their full force arrives. So yeah, we already know that the Blackbeard pirates are here, more could be coming. The answer to the mystery at the end of this chapter could be literally that obvious. And actually, I received a comment in my last video that said something to the effect of, there's no way that the strats just win here in Egghead because the story narratively needs tension. If we consider Egghead to be the beginning of the final arc saga, right, all of the best sagas in One Piece begin with some sort of motivating drama. Nami leaves the crew after the Baratie arc, beginning Arlong. Vivi is revealed to be a princess of a kingdom in peril. Robin leaves the crew. Ace is set up to be executed. The samurai must return home because their kingdom is under the thumb of a powerful Yonko. This is obviously very common in the story, but it isn't all examples. So I'm not actually sure that I entirely agree that this story absolutely needs some source of tension right now. One of the other appeals that Oda draws from when beginning a new arc sometimes is just the sense of adventure, of awesomeness, like the lead up to Skypiea. And you guys already know that I've made a lot of comparisons with Skypiea and Elbaf, so we could begin the arc in a similar sort of feel as that, where adventure is our primary motivation to reach the next island. But either way, whether the story needs tension or not, or Oda decides to do that, I still disagreed with this comment that the strats had to lose, just because there's many ways to create tension. The capture and loss of Robin is equally as effective as the entire crew losing, in my opinion. But while we're talking about the Blackbeard pirates, obviously Robin is something that I think that everyone should be thinking about right now, but there's potentially many things that the Blackbeard pirates could be here for. Blackbeard wanting one of the Vegapunks could make a ton of sense. Just the same as the rationale of Blackbeard's interest in Robin, I think that Blackbeard in the story right now should be gunning for the One Piece, following the poneglyphs and everything that entails. This includes the ancient weapons. So Vegapunk's Mother Flame could be an essential thing that Blackbeard needs to possess. Or maybe Blackbeard knowing that Saturn is here presents an opportunity. It's not every day that you get a shot at one of the Gorosei without having to attack Mary Joie. Another reason that Saturn's decision to initiate a Bunster Call was a terrible idea, especially staying behind in the carnage, is it singles him out. I have this awesome visual in my mind of Blackbeard strolling up to Egghead in the middle of the Buster Call in order to stab Saturn in the back and steal his fruit, and therefore his ability to heal himself. Which would also be awesomely ironic because then the Buster Call would effectively kill him. That height of folly Buster Call surprisingly doing a lot of work. But maybe a more low-key thing that Blackbeard could want from Egghead is the Seraphim. This is a theory I was persuaded on, but it makes a freaking ton of sense. Because the last time that we saw Blackbeard is he was fighting Kobe and Boa Hancock, and the Seraphim were heavily involved, and ultimately Blackbeard decided to retreat. The Seraphim was too much for him to deal with, which gives him a ton of reason to desire it. Imagine this for a second. Blackbeard captures Saturn and forces Saturn to use his authority chip to order the Seraphim to fight for him. Saturn being a Gorosei, this order cannot be overridden, not even from the other Gorosei. Now that's the big brain Blackbeard moves that we've come to expect. Remember, Vegapunk called the Seraphim the strongest form of humanity. Something like that. And I'm just gonna throw it out there, I'm just saying that if Blackbeard comes to possess and enslave the Seraphim Kuma, that could give Bonnie reason to continue traveling with the Straw Hats, give her goal. And it would continue this trend in the story of parallels because it would be very similar to Impel Down leading into Marineford, Blackbeard acquiring his overpowered crew. But yeah guys, if you can't tell, I'm really excited about Blackbeard, and I think that a lot of things are possible. I kind of hope that Oda just chooses them all. Like, that's my favorite thing, is when all of the ideas come true. But the faction at the end of the chapter doesn't have to be Blackbeard, especially if Blackbeard is just here anyway already. I don't know if I want to sit here and go through every single possibility in great detail. I feel like that would be boring. So we'll do this as quickly as possible. I think the first idea that occurred to me as the chapter was happening is the Revolutionary Army, because for the longest time I've expected the Revolutionary Army to arrive. They've potentially following Kuma. Kuma is here. Maybe it's time for a Luffy and Dragon meeting. I love this theory in every possible way except for one. And that one is, I don't know how quickly the Revolutionary Army can travel. Remember, Kuma got here so quickly because of his paw fruit powers, which kind of breaks the rules of the One Piece universe. That being said, maybe it's possible that the Revolutionary Army can do that with Dragon storms, but I don't see any storms surrounding Egghead yet, so there's no visual cues that it's them. That's why I wouldn't bet my life on this right now. I see some people saying that it could be Shanks. I really hope not. I really disagree with this idea because, look, if Shanks is here, then he would be trying to help Luffy. If you weren't helping Luffy throughout his entire adventure, why would you start now? And if Shanks is here for some reason related to Egghead, he could have done that at any point in the past. You would have to go backwards from Elbaf to reach Egghead. Shanks is supposed to be going after the One Piece. This doesn't seem like the next place he should be going. The Grand Fleet is an interesting idea, but I'm just kind of so-so on it. I don't think that Luffy has sustained enough damage for it to really concern the Grand Fleet, and I feel as if Luffy should call the Grand Fleet for them to arrive, and that call would be either his V card or like a literal command. You could maybe argue that Luffy died in Wano, and so all the Grand Fleet members saw his V card shrivel up to essentially nothing, and then they decided, okay, we gotta go find Luffy, but shortly after that, then the V card would have healed itself, so that there would be no reason to continue. Honestly, Cross Guild as an idea makes a lot more sense to me, just in the sense that it's random and possibly hilarious. hilarious. I don't think that there's a ton of setup for it, but it's one of those things that could happen without needing setup. Buggy's just reading the newspaper and honestly jealous that Luffy is doing some crazy shit again and is like, yo guys, we gotta get in on this. But absolutely nobody in the world has mentioned the Big Mom Pirates, and I just want to throw it out there of like, look, if Big Mom is alive, then their goal would be Luffy. Luffy is in Egghead. Maybe this is where their adventure continues. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I'm just gonna throw it out there. It is a faction. Or even without Big Mom, the Big Mom Pirates lost Pudding. Blackbeard has Pudding. They could be going after Blackbeard, who could be here. So yeah, I think the Big Mom Pirates makes more sense than I think anybody really gives it credit for. But if it's not Blackbeard, then my second favorite idea is the Giants of Elbaf and Jaguar D. Sol arriving. We know that Egghead is very close to Elbaf. We know that this Egghead incident has lasted at least a day, possibly more. We know that Vegapunk was friends with Sol and the Giants. That gives them enough reason to want to show up, in my opinion. And they could act as chauffeurs leading to Elbaf, possibly. But anyway, guys, to go back to discussion of the parallels between what's happening here in Ohara and the end of Enies Lobby, the big twist at the end of Enies Lobby was that the Going Merry was sentient. A sentient ship showed up out of nowhere in order to save them. For me, this is going to clearly parallel the arrival of the ancient robot. The sentient ship thing arrives out of nowhere in order to save them. But it also happens to resemble and be approximately the size of a giant. In Ohara, Robin was essentially rescued by a giant in Jaguar D. Sol. For Sol then to return to the story during an active Buster Call would make so much sense, it's wild. So Blackbeard is kind of the obvious idea, but if it's not obvious, then this is definitely my favorite. But yeah, I think that that's everything that I had to say about the chapter today. Obviously, incredible chapter. We're seemingly wrapping up Egghead to some extent. It feels like we have 5 to 10 more chapters of this thing. But as always, I'm curious as to what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Remember to check out my books, The Booms, links in the description. If you guys happen to read it, please leave a review and let other people know what you thought about it. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.